Hello. Thank you for tuning in again. This is now the fourth part in our logic course that we have titled Logic for Faith Folks. I think when people think about logic, the things we are about to start covering from this module, really for the rest of this course, are probably what people have in mind, right? They want to get into it. How do I make sure my arguments are valid and true? So with this module, we are going to get into the rules of valid syllogisms. Like how do we construct syllogistic arguments that are valid? We will go through five rules in this course. They are not exhaustive, but they will get you a long way towards building uh, arguments that are valid. So let's get into it. Uh, it may help to remember what syllogism is, right? It is a structured, particularly structured way of reasoning. We have seen this before, just like the example we have here, where we are trying to derive a new truth. We are trying to deduce a new truth from known truths or accepted truth. These things will be clearer as we proceed, like what I mean by that. So like again, let's revisit this that we have seen before. All believers are saved. Premise one, premise two. Paul is a believer. Conclusion: Paul is saved. This structured way of reasoning, where we derive this conclusion from known and accepted truth, right? Like for somebody who accepts that all believers are saved, so this would be like Christians, and someone who believes that Paul is a believer. If you accept those two premises, then it's forced on you. It cannot cease to be the case that this conclusion follows. Now, if somebody has troubles with one of those premises or both of those premises, then for that person, the conclusion wouldn't follow. Okay, so that should introduce us a little bit to what I mean by accepted truth or known truth. So we're gonna touch on that a little bit. We're not gonna tease that out. That can become controversial really quickly. Now, the first rule doesn't really sound like a rule, but it's actually one that's going to save us a whole lot if we learn to observe it. So basically, he just states that a valid syllogism should have three parts. There should be a major part, and that's the part that will appear in the predicate. Remember, the predicate is the part of your proposition or your statement that asserts something about your subject. So basically, the second half of this statement, basically the usually the clause that's saying something about the subject that you have introduced earlier in your proposition. The minor term will appear as a subject of the conclusion. Notice that we are defining these parts, this anatomy of syllogism. We are defining it based on the conclusion. Okay, and the middle term, it's a linking literary element that doesn't appear in the conclusion, but you will see it that it links the premises together. Okay, so that's, like I say, it doesn't sound like a rule, but as you will see, remember earlier we had said that if we can get the forms right, right, in categorical logic, categorical proposition, if we can get the forms right, logic, the rules of logic don't really care much about the specifics of the statement, right? Like I can say, all cats are mammals. I can say all humans have two legs. I can say it don't matter what the specifics of the statements are. If they conform to a known form in propositional logic, sorry, in categorical logic, then the rules will apply nonetheless. So if we can sort this issue of form, it's going to help us immensely. Okay, so then all that for rule number one. Again, just to identify what we mean by middle and major. So if you go here to the conclusion, it's a Paul is saved. The subject of this proposition, which is Paul, is a minor term. Okay. And the predicate saved here is the major term. Now the middle term is this here, all believers, which happens to be the subject of this premise one. It doesn't appear in the conclusion, but it's really what links premises one and two together and enable us to reach this conclusion. Okay, take your time, make sure you digest this slide here and you are familiar with it, it's going to help immensely as we proceed. All right. Again, the form matters. So what we've just seen takes this form. All BRS, no pun intended. I'm not trying to say that believers are BS, but all believers are saved. Paul is a believer, therefore Paul is saved. All right, that's a valid form. It's a very common way of valid way of presenting syllogism. All right, we'll see more examples as we proceed. Here's a very quick quiz to help you practice identify the parts. Again, it's a test on anatomy of the syllogism. All prophets are men of God. Elijah is a prophet. Therefore, Elijah is a man of God. What identify the parts, and just again, notice the form. Very similar to what we've seen earlier. All PRM, meaning all prophets are men of God. E is P, therefore E is M. Notice how this works out, right? Like the form is very important. It's almost like, so we have like these all P are M. That's the first premise. And then in the second premise picks out the subject of the first premise, the P. So it's a E is P. And then the conclusion takes the second part of the first premise, which is M. Again, the terms. Make sure you are familiar with this. It's going to help a whole lot. Now, rule number two can be very tricky. And so I have decided to devote quite a few slides to this. It may very well be one of the most important parts because this is where you will come across arguments that sound very, it just sound like it should be correct. But then when you look closer, it isn't. And this rule is going to help us a whole lot if we can figure this out. So the rule says that the middle term, remember, the middle term uh, is the one that doesn't appear in the conclusion, but serves to link premises one and two together and enable us to make the move to the conclusion. Well, that middle term, that rule number one may have given you the impression that the middle term doesn't matter because it doesn't appear in the conclusion. Well, it turns out there's a whole rule devoted to that middle term. And he just says here that it must be distributed. That this is a technical term in logic, distributed. That means it must apply to all members of its class at least once. Okay, let me give you an example, an invalid example, so that we can appreciate what we're talking about here. Premise one says all Pharisees love money. Okay. Again, remember, a Pharisee is the subject. All there is a universal quantifier. Love money is really the predicate, which also in this case is going to be the middle term, right? So Judas loves money, and then the conclusion this syllogism wants to draw is that Judas is a Pharisee. Okay, why is this a problem? Even if it's the case that all Pharisees love money, notice that love money, that middle term, that predicate, isn't unique only to the group that we have identified as all Pharisees. In other words, there are other classes of people that aren't Pharisees that also love money, like the Republicans love money. Perhaps some Democrats love money. Maybe all politicians love money. In fact, maybe there are some ministers who love money. So there are many other people that love money, and because that's the case, because the predicate love money, because the middle term love money isn't doesn't uniquely apply to all Pharisees, we may not pick out Judas or any other individual who we don't already know is a Pharisee. We may not make that move and say, because Judas also loves money, therefore Judas must be a Pharisee. Because it may very well be that Judas is a politician. Or it may be that Judas is a minister of the gospel that peddles the gospel for money. So it doesn't follow. And the technical reason why this doesn't work is exactly, again, because the middle term, love money, is not distributed across these premises here. Uh, let's zero in on this a little bit. First of all, notice that perhaps if you have paid attention to the form, you may have already seen that it doesn't follow, right? Because remember earlier we saw this example where we said all believers are saved. Paul is a believer, therefore Paul is saved. That's an example of a valid syllogism. Well, check this out. The one we just looked at that says all Pharisees love money. Judas loves money, therefore Judas it's a Pharisee. Notice how the form doesn't follow. It's not the same as this other form that we've already seen before. Notice how, whereas here in the valid example, after we went from all believers are saved, we are able to first pull out the subject of premise one in our premise two. That becomes the predicate of premise two, right? P is B. B was the subject before, but now B is the predicate of the second one. And then we are able to make a valid conclusion. That's not what we're doing here. In fact, this example, even though the problem here is that the middle term isn't distributed, it's also another example in logic that we call the fallacy or the error of affirming the consequent. It doesn't work. It's an invalid way of reasoning. It doesn't work. So again, form, if you know the form and you familiarize yourself with the form, you may be saved already at this point. But let's zero in even further. What exactly do we mean by saying the middle term must be distributed? Think about a box, and I've never walked in a post office before, but here I have a picture of a big box that consists of smaller boxes. Okay, so the big box outside uh, is the so we have so in this example that we have here, like for instance, where we say all pastors are Christians. Well, all pastors are just one of these smaller boxes that are inside the big box that we have called Christians. So unless the subject here, unless all pastors or even all evangelists in the second premise, unless they are exactly equal, meaning they include every member that's within this bigger box of Christian, it would not be distributed. In fact, if a statement includes or excludes every member of a group, it must either include all of them, all, how many do we have here? 12? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. It must either include all 12 smaller boxes, all of them, or excludes all of them. If any of those conditions entails, then we would say it's distributed. If it only involves some of them, then we will say it's not distributed. So that's why the earlier example about the all Pharisees didn't work, because there are other people who love money that aren't Pharisees. And the same thing is the case here, because there are Christians that are not pastors. There are Christians that are not evangelists. All right, there are many other roles people who are Christians play. So because of that, because the term Christians here is not distributed, right, across all pastors and all evangelists or whatever terms you have in your own example, we may not draw this kind of conclusion. It doesn't follow that, therefore. And of course, if you are a Christian, you kind of intuitively know that this doesn't follow, right? The other one may be more confusing because we're using Judas is a Judas loves money, therefore Judas is a Pharisee. If you're not very familiar with the story of Judas, you may be confused. But this one is a little more apparent, right? Like it's like you intuitively know, although of course a pastor may also be an evangelist, but it's not the case that all pastors are also evangelists. Okay. The technical term here is that the middle term is not distributed. All right. Here's one more example. Like I said, I have devoted a few slides to this because you just need to master it, and you got to do more reading, more studying to master it. But it's one that is easy for us all to fall into because the argument will appear sound and valid, especially if you are not very familiar with the claims of the premises. You may very well fall into it. Okay, so here's another example. All tithers are church members. All choir members are church members. Therefore, all choir members are tithers. Again, the same problem. The middle term, church members, is not distributed in these premises. It's not. Okay? the the group that we have called church members consist of way, way more people other than tithers and choir members, right? Like what? We got pastors in there, we got evangelists in there, we have ushers in there, we got bench warmers in there. That's a role I played for many years. All right, you got all of sort of people in there. So it doesn't follow, because this middle term church members is not distributed, all right, across the subjects, all tithers and all choir members. This kind of conclusion is not drawn on firm logical grounds. So we may not say all choir members are tithers. And of course, if you've been a church member for a few weeks, a few months, you can intuitively tell. You can tell experientially, actually, that that's not necessarily the case. It's not the case that all choir members are also givers of their tithes. Okay, so the problem isn't so much that the conclusion is wrong, but it's even worse than that. There is simply no logically valid conclusion that we may draw in these kind of situations. Okay, so yeah, that's all of that for rule number two. Okay. Here's a quick quiz. Determine, it may help you to write out the form first and then determine, the form might alert you that there may be a problem. And once you recognize and believe that there's a problem, perhaps you can find ways to fix it. Okay. Um, Here's one possible fix for that. Let me go back there so you can see it. So this is the original form we have. It says, all who believe are saved. Some who believe are baptized. Therefore, some who are saved are baptized. Okay, that's the original claim. This is not the only fix, but you could fix it this way. Right? So it becomes all who believe are saved, which is exactly what we have before. All who believe are saved. Some who believe are baptized was the original one. Now we say some who are saved are baptized. Once you tweak it a little bit at the level of the second premise, then you may draw this conclusion. Maybe also write the form for this new form and compare it to the older one so you can see the difference. The key lesson here is that, as we have been stressing, just because two groups are interconnected, like if we use the Venn diagram image, they have an area of overlap, doesn't mean they also overlap with another independent group. That's the point here. That's the larger point that we are making in these examples. All right. All of that for rule number two. Remember, rule number one, there must be three parts: minor, major terms, and the middle term. And that the middle term must be distributed. Now, a syllogism cannot have two negative premises. If you do, you're kind of sort of going to be in the same neighborhood as some of the examples we've just seen, where you may not draw any valid conclusion. Okay, it's just too open. And anatomically, as far as the form goes, or shall I say formally, the problem is that there is no middle term, right? There is no connection between the two premises, and so we are unable. There's no bridge that will connect you to your conclusion or lead you to your conclusion. All right. Rule number four. It gets simpler, I think, as we go on. I think number two might be the most technical. Number four says, if one premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. All right. So again, if we say all righteous people obey God, and then premise two says Judas does not obey God, then Judas is not righteous. That's a valid conclusion. It has to be negative because one of the premises is negative. The danger here is the temptation to want to draw a positive conclusion when you have a negative premise. And rule number five, and I believe this may be the last one that I will be discussing. Uh, this should be easy. I think most people can intuitively understand this one, that the conclusion may not go beyond the information provided in the premises, right? Again, here's an invalid example. All Christians believe in Jesus, premise one. Premise two says, Mind Philip is a Christian. And then conclusion, Mind Philip is a pastor. I mean, the predicate pastor here, he just came out of nowhere. It's like it materializes out of who knows what. That none of the premises say anything about a pastor. Therefore, we may not import that into our conclusion. Remember, syllogism is a structured way of reasoning where you have a middle term that does the middling or connecting of the two premises, forming a bridge that allows you to safely arrive at your conclusion. Here, there is just, yeah, the pastor there, he just came out of nowhere. Okay, that doesn't work. Don't do that. All right. Uh, I have a lot of quizzes in this module just because it's so important. I think, like I said, this is probably what most people think about when they think about logic. So here's an example. It says, complete the argument, syllogism below with a valid conclusion. Okay, so the premises are correct. You just need to find a conclusion that follows from that. And here's another example, actually, three examples, all of them fill in the blanks. All humans are mortal. James is blank. If you have already learned the form that I told you you should learn earlier in this module, you will know that the answer to this should be James should be human, right? Premise two picks out the subject of premise one so that the conclusion can pick out the predicate of premise one. That's the form. Okay, so these are filling the gaps. And then even more examples. These ones, you are supposed to determine whether the following syllogisms are valid. If they are not, what's the error? What's the error? And then try to fix it. Okay. Uh, Even more example. This guarantees you that each of these syllogisms here is flawed, right? Something is wrong with each of them. Okay, so you have given that information, rewrite them, make them valid. You may also push yourself, try to figure out why is it wrong, and then fix it. Again, even more example, the middle terms. Can you figure out what the middle terms are in these examples? Now, I'm not sure if they are formally correct or if they are flawed otherwise, but I think the assumption is that there are no other flaws. You are just supposed to recognize the middle terms. Okay. Um, Even more examples, all right? This is serious business. This is the heart of categorical logic. If you get this right, you're probably more than 50% there. This is freestyling, I believe. Can you construct a valid syllogism using the premise, God is love? So basically, make up any other premise, but make sure one of your premises is God is love, and then see what kind of conclusions you may draw from that. And then we have one here that says, identify why the following syllogism doesn't work. In other words, find fault with it. And then we have another one like the first one that says, build a syllogism where one of your premises is the Bible is trustworthy. Again, if you want to make this real fun, you may share your answers in the comment section so that we can interact with the answers you have come up with and we may all learn from one another. Okay, in logic, there are two related but different terms, so this is a good place to bring that up. An argument or a syllogism may be valid, but not true. It may be true, but not valid. Okay? Where we really want to be in logic is where we have both of them. We want our syllogism to be valid and we want it to be true. Now, what do we mean by valid and what do we mean by true? The validity of a syllogism has more to do with the form. Remember, form. All P S. As a matter of fact, let's do an example here. We've seen this before, and we recognize that this didn't work, right? Uh, all who love money are Pharisees. Actually, I have fixed it so that this works. Remember, in the earlier example, it just says all Pharisees love money. That was premise one. But this is different, right? Remember, the problem with stating it that way, that all Pharisees love money, is that love money there doesn't distribute, right? There are other people, other classes of people who love money that aren't Pharisees. Well, in this reformulation, we don't have that problem because this premise makes it clear that all who love money, if you love money, you are a Pharisee. So if you are a politician, you are a Republican, you are a Democrat, you are a gospel peddler that just peddles the gospel for money, whatever else you do, so far as you are rapacious or love money, you are a Pharisee. That's what this premise one says. It's totally different from the original formulation that simply says all Pharisees love money. That leaves room for other people who love money that may not be Pharisees. But in this example, he says all who love money are Pharisees. So by definition, basically, if you love money, you are a Pharisee. Now, as it turns out, this reformulation of the argument will make this argument to be valid, meaning the form is correct. Okay? If premise two says Judas loves money, then Judas is a Pharisee. In fact, everybody who loves money is a Pharisee under this formulation. So it's valid. The form is tight, it's correct. Is it correct though? Is it true? No. Okay, why isn't it true? Because of premise one. We do know that not all who love money are, in fact, Pharisees. Okay, so that's what I meant earlier in the module when I was saying syllogism. It's a formulaic or a formal or structured way of reasoning where we want to derive no truth from established or known truth. So this is where it matters to qualify what we mean by established and known truth, right? Like if you accept that all who love money are Pharisees, then for you, this is valid and true. But in fact, in the real world, we know that not all who love money self-identify as Pharisees. Nor do we even identify them as Pharisees. Okay, they could just be. Some of them are not even religious altogether that love money. You see what I mean here? So when we question premise one, then what we have is an argument that is valid, but it's not true. And logically, at least for this course, that's not where we want to be. Where we want to be is where we have both valid and true. All right. Um, yeah, that's the point I've just made. Logic needs both of them. We need it to be true and we need it to be valid. All right, so that's where we're gonna stop in this module. Remember, there are way more contents and more goodies for you at our website, decolonizedchristianity.org. Follow us on social media. If you have found this content useful and helpful, please share with friends and family members. And see you in the next class where we shall be dealing with fallacies and how to recognize fallacies. Thank you very much. Godspeed.